Sunday was once a weekly declaration that Jesus is alive, work is not our master, and God's people belong together. But today, worship is often reduced to 1 hour, while entertainment, sports, errands, and screens receive everything that remains. The question is not whether every Sunday activity is sinful. The question is whether Christ still has the center, or merely a time slot. Sunday didn't become significant because someone decided a weekend needed a second day off. It became significant because of what happened on one specific morning to one specific group of people who had every reason to expect nothing at all. Before going further, one boundary is worth setting plainly. This isn't an argument for Saturday over Sunday or Sunday over Saturday. Believers have debated that for centuries, and the New Testament never actually settles it by command. It calls believers to worship God every day, not just Saturday or Sunday. Matthew 28 and John 20 both mark it the same way. The women arrived at the tomb on the first day of the week, and the tomb was already empty. Not the seventh day. Not the Sabbath the whole nation had kept for centuries. The day every instinct in their culture would have pointed toward. The first day, a new day, arriving on a morning nobody expected anything to happen at all. That detail is easy to skip past, but it's the entire foundation of everything that follows. Every Sunday since has been sitting on top of that one morning, whether the person living through it realizes it or not. Consider what that timing actually meant to people raised inside Sabbath observance their entire lives. For centuries, the seventh day had been the fixed point of the week, protected by law, defended by tradition, argued over by scholars, and then, without warning, the most significant event any of them would ever witness happened on a completely different day. The resurrection didn't reform the Sabbath. It didn't relocate it. It planted something new right beside it on a day that had never carried any special weight before that morning. It didn't take long for that morning to shape a pattern. John 20 records Jesus appearing to his gathered disciples that same evening, the first day of the week, hours after the resurrection, and he showed up exactly where they were meeting. Weeks and months later, the pattern hadn't faded. Acts 20 describes believers in Troas gathered specifically on the first day of the week to break bread, with Paul teaching them so long, the meeting ran past midnight. Nobody was checking a clock for an exit. Paul kept talking because the people kept listening, and the room kept listening back. 1 Corinthians 16 shows the same day being used for something else entirely. Believers setting aside a portion of what they had, week by week, on the first day, as an act of shared generosity, planned in advance, rather than left to whatever happened to be left over. And by the time John writes Revelation, the day already has a name of its own. He describes himself as in the Spirit on what he calls the Lord's Day, a phrase Christians have understood ever since as pointing straight back to that first morning at the tomb. Put those pieces next to each other and a shape emerges that has nothing to do with rest for its own sake. The seventh-day Sabbath in the Old Testament was God's gift of rest, built into creation itself, protected by law, extended even to servants and animals under a household's care. Sunday grew out of something different. It wasn't a continuation of the Sabbath under a new name, a rebranding with the same purpose underneath. It was a resurrection day, a weekly return to the morning everything changed, observed by gathering, by teaching, by giving, by breaking bread together. That's the most accurate way to say it. The Sabbath began as a gift of rest. Sunday became a declaration of resurrection, and a declaration is a very different thing from an obligation. Nobody gathered on that first day because a law demanded it. There was no Sunday equivalent of the fourth commandment anywhere in the New Testament, no verse instructing believers to treat the first day the way Israel had treated the seventh. They gathered because something had actually happened, and gathering was the only sane response to it. Imagine believing genuinely that the person your entire life now revolved around had walked out of a sealed tomb. You wouldn't need a law telling you to show up on the anniversary of that morning every single week for the rest of your life. You'd want to. You'd struggle to stay away. That wanting is what built the day, not a rule, a memory too large to keep privately and too specific to fade into vague sentiment. It had a date, a location, and witnesses who were willing to die rather than take the claim back. It's worth pausing on that last point because it separates this claim from every other reason a culture has ever set a day apart. Most sacred days commemorate an idea, a founding, a harvest, a battle won. This one commemorated a body that had stopped being dead. The disciples who kept gathering on that first day weren't preserving a metaphor they found meaningful. They were repeating an eyewitness claim, week after week, in public, at real personal risk, long after any social or political advantage to doing so had disappeared. People don't keep doing that for a story they made up to feel better. Once that wanting took hold, it didn't stay abstract. It built an actual rhythm made of specific parts, and every part pointed back to the same claim. Gathering came first, and it meant more than proximity. Hebrews 10 doesn't just tell believers to show up in the same room. It tells them to spur one another toward love and good deeds, and to keep encouraging each other, especially as difficulty grew closer. That's not attendance. That's shared life, with real obligations attached to being present. Nobody in that instruction gets to be a spectator. Everybody in the room is assigned a role, whether they've noticed it or not. The person doing the spurring and the person being spurred, often the same person, on different weeks. The word came next, and it sat at the center rather than the edges. Acts 2 describes the earliest believers as devoted to the apostles' teaching. Devoted, not merely dutiful. Scripture wasn't squeezed into a slot between other appointments. It was the reason for the appointment. There was no sense that the teaching needed to compete for attention against everything else the day might otherwise hold, because nothing else was scheduled against it in the first place. Worship followed, and it was communal by design. Colossians 3 pictures believers teaching and admonishing each other through psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with gratitude, not a performance watched from rows of chairs, but something the whole room was doing to each other, out loud, together. The songs weren't background. They were instruction, delivered horizontally, believer to believer, as much as they were addressed upward. Then communion and fellowship, inseparable from each other in Acts 2's description of the early church. Believers breaking bread in their homes, eating together with glad and sincere hearts. The meal wasn't a symbol bolted onto worship. It was where worship actually happened, at a table with food someone had cooked, in a home someone had opened, on a schedule nobody was rushing toward the next thing. Rest had its place too, even without a direct New Testament command matching the Sabbath law. Many believers simply understood that a day this full of gathering, worship, and shared life couldn't also be a day of ordinary labor. The rest wasn't legislated from outside. It was implied by everything else the day was already carrying. There simply wasn't room left for the ordinary week to intrude. Households carried it further still. Deuteronomy 6 had already established the pattern generations earlier, talking about God's commands at home, on the road, at bedtime, at breakfast. And Christian households absorbed that same instinct into their Sundays, turning the day into something taught, not just attended. A child growing up inside that rhythm wasn't learning about faith from a single hour a week. They were learning it from an entire day, repeated, modeled, and discussed at every meal. And it reached outward, not just inward. Galatians 6 tells believers to do good to everyone, especially to the family of faith, while Jesus himself, defending an act of mercy done on a Sabbath, points out that doing good is never out of place on a day set apart for God. Worship that stayed inside the walls wasn't worship as the New Testament pictured it. The day that remembered the resurrection was also, by design, the day that noticed who was struggling nearby. Gathering, the word, worship, communion, rest, households taught, the needy served. None of these were separate items on a checklist, competing with each other for limited minutes. They were one thing, viewed from different angles, a day built entirely around a single claim that Christ is risen and everything else answers to him. It's worth noticing what's absent from that list, too. There's no mention of a stage, a production schedule, a parking team, or a program printed for the week. None of that is wrong to have. Plenty of it simply helps a large gathering function. But it's worth remembering that the earliest version of this day ran entirely without any of it, powered by nothing more than people who believed something true had happened and showed up to keep saying so together in whatever room was available. That was the day's grammar. What happened to that grammar is a story worth telling, honestly, without either exaggerating the loss or excusing it. Nobody sat down one afternoon and decided to replace the resurrection with a football schedule. That's not how any of this happened. It happened the way most quiet losses happen. One convenience at a time, each one reasonable, none of them announced as a trade against something sacred. Part of it was economic. As industrial time turned every hour into a wage, rest stopped being free in the way it once was. Every unclaimed hour started carrying an opportunity cost, whether anyone framed it that way out loud or not. Part of it was legal. The laws that once kept storefronts closed on Sunday fell away across the 20th century, state by state, mostly through quiet legislative votes rather than public demand, and part of it arrived through a screen. As televisions filled American living rooms through the 1950s, a new kind of gathering moved in right beside the old one. Appointed kickoff times, shared meals, cooked for the occasion, a room full of people feeling the same thing together. Nobody built that on purpose to compete with church. It simply filled the same emotional shape the day had always held, and it filled it well because the shape itself never went away. It just found a new occupant. None of these three forces acted alone either. They reinforced each other. A family with a store open nearby had less reason to plan their whole day around church, since errands no longer had to wait until Monday. A family with a television in the living room had a second gathering already competing for the evening hours the early church had once reserved for a second meeting of its own. And a family whose hours were increasingly priced by an employer had less patience for a day that produced nothing measurable, even a day they still loved. Each force alone might have left the center intact. Together, they didn't just compete with Sunday's original shape. They replaced it piece by piece with something that looked similar from the outside, but carried none of the same weight on the inside. Here's what that combination actually produced, and it's worth naming plainly. Sunday shifted from resurrection to recreation. The center of the day moved from an empty tomb to whatever screen, field, or store happened to be closest. Sports claimed an afternoon. Streaming claimed an evening. Errands claimed a morning that used to belong to a gathered church. Children's tournaments claimed entire weekends, kickoff to final whistle, with church treated as the activity that had to be worked around rather than the one everything else adjusted to. None of that makes any single Sunday activity sinful on its own. A ball game isn't a moral failure. Groceries aren't a betrayal. The issue was never the individual activity. It's what quietly became central and what kept getting pushed toward the margins to make room for it. Picture a household living through that shift, one generation at a time. A grandmother who remembers an entire day built around church, a shared meal, and family conversation. A daughter who still attends most weeks, but whose afternoons increasingly belong to a child's travel league instead of a table. A grandchild for whom church is simply the thing that happens before the real activity of the day begins. Real, in the sense of the thing everyone actually planned their morning around. Nobody in that family rejected the resurrection outright at any single point. The center just kept getting nudged week after week until it wasn't the center anymore. Ask that grandmother what changed, and she probably couldn't point to a single Sunday. She'd point to a slow accumulation of small, forgivable exceptions. A league that only had Sunday slots available, a store that happened to be open on the way home, a television that made staying in feel easier than gathering out. Each exception, taken alone, was completely understandable. Stacked across 3 generations, they add up to a family that still believes the resurrection happened and has almost no remaining habits built around remembering it. That same shift changed what church itself looked like on the inside. The pattern for many people narrowed down to something small and repeatable. Drive to church, watch a service, sing a few songs, hear a message, leave quickly, return to ordinary life. Efficient, predictable. Nothing about that pattern is evil, but it is a long way from what Acts 2 describes, a community devoted to teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, prayer, generosity, and mutual care. None of it contained inside 60 minutes, none of it treated as optional once the closing song ended. And once church became something watched rather than something shared, it started getting evaluated the way people evaluate anything else they consume. Was the music enjoyable? Was the message engaging? Was the service short enough to fit the rest of the day's plans? Did it deliver something useful before everyone moved on? 1 Corinthians 14 pictures something almost opposite. Believers arriving with a hymn, a teaching, a revelation, each one bringing something to strengthen the whole gathering rather than arriving to receive a product and grade it on the way out. Worship built around participation asks what you're bringing. Worship built around consumption only ever asks what you got out of it. And once that becomes the standing question, it's only a matter of time before the answer starts to feel thin. Here's the plainest way to put what actually happened, stripped of every excuse. Sunday was meant to say something specific, every single week, without needing a single word spoken. Christ is risen. God comes first. His people gather. The word gets opened. The table gets shared. The weary receive rest. The lonely receive fellowship. The needy receive care. The family remembers God together on purpose. What Sunday has often become says something else entirely, just as clearly, just as loudly, whether anyone means it to or not. A rushed appointment squeezed between everything else, a sports day, a streaming day, a shopping day, a day for catching up on whatever the week left unfinished, a day for bracing for Monday before Monday even arrives. A day filled with activity from morning to night, and strangely empty of the one thing it was originally built to remember. That's the real diagnosis, and it's worth stating precisely because the vague version lets everyone off too easily. Sunday didn't lose its meaning because sports exist, or because stores stayed open, or because people enjoy their afternoons. Enjoyment was never the enemy here. It lost its meaning the moment the resurrection stopped ordering the day, and became, instead, a single interruption inside a day ordered by everything else. 1 hour carved out for God, surrounded on every side by hours that answer to something, or someone, else entirely. That's a sharper question than whether church attendance has declined and a fairer one than asking whether any particular Sunday activity is wrong. The real question sits underneath all of that. Does Christ actually hold the center of the day, or has he been assigned a slot inside a day someone else is running? A slot can be moved, a slot can be shortened, a slot can be skipped when something better comes up, without much guilt attached because a slot was never claiming to be the center of anything. A center behaves differently. A center is what everything else gets arranged around, not the other way around. Consider the practical difference this makes across a single, ordinary Sunday. A center means the family's morning gets built around gathering, and the afternoon's plans bend to fit whatever the morning required. A slot means the gathering has to prove it's worth keeping, squeezed against a kickoff time, a store's hours, a tournament bracket, all of them treated as fixed, while church is treated as negotiable. Nobody announces that hierarchy out loud. It just becomes visible in what gets protected without a second thought and what gets apologized for instead. The coach, who never has to explain a Sunday morning practice, and the parent who feels a small, quiet need to explain why the family missed this week. There's a simple test that tends to expose which version of Sunday a household is actually living, whatever it might say out loud about its priorities. Notice what happens the moment two things land on the same Sunday morning by accident. A tournament and a gathering, an early tea time and a shared meal, a sale worth driving across town for, and a conversation someone had been hoping to have. Whatever wins that collision, almost without exception and almost without a debate, is the thing actually holding the center. Everything else was only ever occupying a slot. None of this requires shutting down every store or canceling every game to fix. What it requires is smaller and far more personal, reclaiming the actual shape the day was given at the start. A meal shared instead of rushed. Scripture opened together instead of skimmed alone. A gathering that isn't measured by how quickly it lets everyone leave. Households that talk about God on the way home, not just inside the building. Care extended to someone in need because that was never separate from worship in the first place. It was worship expressed with hands instead of a voice. Not a return to a law nobody was ever placed under, a return to the wanting that built the day in the first place. The same wanting that sent people running to a tomb before sunrise because something had actually happened and staying home was never going to be an option. Sunday was never really about the hour, it was about the center. An empty tomb either changes everything about how a day gets spent, or it changes almost nothing at all. 1 hour, and then life as usual resumes exactly where it left off. There isn't much room between those two. A resurrection that only rearranges 60 minutes of a week isn't being treated as a resurrection at all. It's being treated as an interesting piece of history, acknowledged briefly, and then set aside for the things that actually get to run the rest of the day. That's not a condemnation aimed at any one family, any one church, any one Sunday afternoon spent watching a game instead of reading a passage together. Almost everyone alive today inherited this version of the day without ever choosing it deliberately. Nobody sat their children down and explained that church would now be 60 minutes long, that community would now mostly happen in a lobby, that the meal would now be optional. It simply arrived that way, generation after generation, each one adjusting slightly further from the last without noticing how far the total distance had grown, which means the fix isn't really about guilt either, however tempting guilt might feel in the moment right after hearing all of this laid out plainly. Guilt tends to produce a single dramatic Sunday of overcorrection followed by a slow drift right back to whatever felt normal before. What actually rebuilds a day like this is smaller and steadier than that. One deliberate choice, repeated on purpose, week after week, the same way the original rhythm was built in the first place. Nobody needs a law passed to keep a meal unhurried. Nobody needs an ancient legal code reinstated to open scripture together before the television gets turned on. The center gets rebuilt the same way it got lost, one ordinary decision at a time, made by ordinary people, week after week, until the decision becomes a rhythm nobody has to think about anymore. So here's the only question worth carrying out of this. On your Sunday, does Christ hold the center of the day, or just a slot inside it?